Factor Network to bring you a brand new show, Stories from the Continent, every Saturday at 4 p.m. Do make sure you join us. There will be lots of fun, informative, and impactful conversation. Hi everyone, my name is Haddy and I'm a journalist and communications specialist. I believe that as Africans, we should be in charge of every narrative coming out of Africa. We have a lot of positive stories to tell and share with the world, and I'm determined to use my platform to make that a reality. This is why I've teamed up with the Factor Network to bring you a brand new show, Stories from the Continent, every Saturday at 4 p.m. Do make sure you join us. There will be lots of fun, informative, and impactful conversation. Hello everyone, Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for joining me on Stories from the Continent this Saturday. As always, I appreciate you all, and you already know how this goes by now. I'm joined by a guest from the continent or the diaspora every weekend, and we have a conversation about their work. We allow them to tell their story and really just celebrate them. Today, though, I have a very, very special guest joining us all the way from Accra, Maudo Jallow. He's a young Gambian that is living and working in Ghana. It's a pleasure to have you, Maudo.
No, it's really my pleasure to be on. I've heard good stories, about the work that you do and also the program, so I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. So Maudo, we're going to spend some time talking about youth unemployment and youth development in the continent and how we can come up with solutions. And then we're going to go into investing in Africa. I know these are two areas that you're very familiar with, so I'm just hoping that you will be able to kind of give us some insight into that world.
Sure.
Okay, so Maudo, your story tells us a lot about what is possible in Africa and what is possible to us as Africans. You're an associate at the Tony Blair Institute. Before that, you were working at the UN as an international development expert. You're also senior advisor to the Ghana Startup Network. Also, again, founder of New Nation Gambia. Talk to us about your journey post-graduation and getting into the UN and TBI.
So I think for many people, this idea of getting into careers like mine it's almost seen as a myth or this kind of enigma. You don't know where to begin. Do you know somebody in the system or something like that? I think there is always an element of that. But for me, it was staying ready, I always say, is being in the right place at the right time and also constantly networking with people in your field. So if you want to go, as you well know, Haddy, if you want to be a journalist, you network with journalists, you know what's going on, you go to conferences and things like that. It's hard work. I used to have a lot of my friends saying, Maudo, yo, mom, every day or every weekend you're going to this conference or that conference. And after a while, they started to nod their heads and they said, oh, actually, I see why you're doing that, So, so to answer your question directly, I left uni and I'm not shy to talk about this. I went home to Gambia, I had applied to a bunch of jobs, didn't get any. They didn't even reply. Mm-hmm. I went and lived with my mom in Gambia for about 5 months. And, some days were tough, like you wake up, you're wondering, I went to one of the best schools in the world, everyone's expecting all these great things from me. And here I am, in my bed, in my pajamas every day, not doing anything. And I mean, eventually I had a friend who told me about this opportunity at the UN, and they're looking to replace someone, and I applied, and it aligned very well, because I had done industrialization in school, and then it happened to be with the Industrial Development Organization of the UN. So it kind of merged very well. And they were looking for someone who could write, about industrialization, about research. So, and then the rest is history. So after that, I joined the UN. I was there for a year. Long story short, I didn't really feel like it was the best place for me to grow. So this opportunity came to move to Ghana, which is where I grew up for a long part of my life. And I grabbed it with both hands. So that's how I ended up here.
Okay. It sounds very relatable. Talking about Ghana, though, I think across the continent, we have seen how well Ghana is doing as a country. The government is definitely attracting the right type of investment. And I've seen you talk about building an Africa that works for young people. I just want you to tell us what you mean by that, and also how you think Ghana is doing that.
I think so. I think the best way to empower young people is in two ways: economically and politically. Right. So let's leave politically to the side for now. I'm sure we'll go into that later and focus on the economic side. Right. When you talk about empowering young people economically, most of the time you're
Yeah.
talking about jobs for young people. Right. You're creating opportunities for young people to gain employment and gain an income, and then be able to support their families or support their lives or whatever, or start building wealth. Now, the best way I think to do that is to create investment or attract investment in pro-youth sectors, right? So what do I mean by pro-youth sectors? There's sectors in the economy that are most likely to hire young people. So if you're investing in tech, if you're investing in sort of low skill um, jobs as well, jobs that need manual labor or they need a lot of energy or dynamism, then you're also investing in young people. So for me, I don't subscribe to the whole idea of, having all, these workshops and trainings that are supposed to inspire young people. They're great, but it's very short-termist in its view. I prefer to deal with the structural issues that hold or stop young people from being employed in the Gambia or across the continent. And that's what I like to focus on.
And how would you say Ghana is doing that? How would you say Ghana as a country?
So the Tony Blair Institute is here supporting the government on a bunch of different things, but we support mainly on trade and industry. So that's the part that I'm involved in, and also with agriculture. And as you know, industry and agriculture are two of the biggest sectors in any economy or in Africa. But
Yes.
it's important because these sectors are also labor intensive, right? So they need a lot of people working, sometimes manual labor, hard labor, for a long period of time. Who's more suitable to do that? Young people, right? So what we do is try and get investment in those areas, in agro processing, in manufacturing, in agriculture, just plain old agriculture, and trying to build those sectors up so they grow, they scale up, and they employ more people. By so doing, ensuring that young people have opportunities in those sectors, right? So that's how that all of that comes together. So my attraction to this particular role that I'm in now was that it was the opportunity to create employment through investing or attracting investment in these sectors that would then help young people gain an income and gain opportunity.
Maudo, we've also seen this trend, I'll call it for lack of a better word, of young Africans kind of moving back home to create this new narrative of Africa. Tell us about your experience as a Gambian living in Ghana.
First of all, so let's tackle the two parts of your question. So the first part is young people moving back to the continent. Absolutely.
Yes.
I've seen so many people moving back to the continent and they're extremely excited about the prospects. But for me, it's different because the plan for me was always to move back to the continent. There was never an iteration of my vision for myself that included staying, in the US or the UK for the extended period of my life. It was always moving back to the continent. Now, I wanted to move back on my terms and with a job that I knew would do two things: make me enough money to take care of myself and support a family or my existing family, and then two, allow me to create impact, right? So when I was at the UN, the reason I left was because I found a job that did that. So I also, just a quick point on that, I also urge young people that are looking to move back to be very careful in how they do it. Don't just pack up and move back and say, I'm here to save the continent. No, try as much as possible, to be intentional about researching and finding out ways that you can tangibly create change, and then move back, right? Because we, we want to encourage the diaspora to be involved, but we also know that there are ways in which diaspora involvement has been less than optimal or even detrimental, as we well know as Gambians, right? So that's
Yeah.
number one. Now, number two was the second part of your question was, sorry, I lost that.
Was your experience as a Gambian living in Ghana?
Yeah. So for me, again, it's a unique situation because, growing up, my dad worked in Ghana. So I lived in Ghana for
Okay.
8 years of my life. So for me, Ghana has
Mm-hmm.
always been like a second home. Obviously, Gambia is always number one on my list and my home. But Ghana has always been a close second because um, I grew up here. I have a lot of friends here. I went to school here. I live in a place now that I used to come to sometimes to play football on the weekends. It's the same area. So it feels very much like home. So I don't know if my experience will be very useful for everyone else that's watching in terms of understanding the
Yeah.
dynamic of Gambian living, in Ghana. But one thing that I'll say is that there are a lot of expats, both African and non-African, that are living in Ghana. And a lot of us agree that it's a great place to live and work at the moment. And it's really a country on the rise, as you've mentioned.
Mm-hmm. And Maudo, you talk about leaving the UN in New York and moving to Ghana, which is, a bold step. And I'm just wondering. You've also said, I've seen you say somewhere a bit about how people thought you were crazy for doing that. And I just want you to again talk about people that are considering taking jobs in the diaspora, because from the diaspora to Africa, because as you know, there's quite a lot of people here that feel like, well, I'm not really contributing to Africa as much as I would want to, or I want to be making an impact in my country, in my continent. Tell us why such a bold step, and what are some of the reactions that you received when you did that?
By the way, can I just say your questioning is brilliant. I mean, honestly, great questions. I think, again, I'll just repeat that. I think it's you have to be careful in how you go about this, right? For me, like I said, it was a bold step to jump from the UN in New York and what many people saw as a dream job or whatever, and come to Ghana and to be perfectly candid, take a pay cut, to come to Ghana, because it's not going to work for everyone. For me, I had a support system, a mini support system of friends and a couple of family members that live here in Ghana that have been so helpful in helping me, move and also settle down in Ghana. I've been here for about a year and 2 months, and it's been great, right? So again, that's not going to be the same for someone else who is just moving to Ghana and has no support system or whatever. So that's point number one. On the point about people thinking I was crazy, 100%. And I mean, even my dad, who is a mentor of mine, questioned the move and thought, why don't you stick around for a while? It's the UN, and you can build your career in a much more sort of slow process, build the right experience, and then you can make the jump. But for me, it was clear to me because I had this job that was waiting for me, but then also because I love Ghana and I had lived in Ghana, so making that jump wasn't that as crazy as a lot of people thought. And just on that point, I want to say to a lot of young people, because even this week I launched my website and I made this big deal about it and so on. And some people messaged me and said, Maudo, aren't you too young to be, starting a website, shouting about all your, things that you have done, in your short career? And I said to them, or well, some of them, the ones that I could say this to, that I don't think there's a time frame or a time that you have to get to in your life where you do something like start a website. I think for me, if my career so far has shown anything, is that if you put yourself out there in the best light and you're very careful in crafting your career and your image and things like that, people will resonate with your story. If you're honest and authentic about your story and you tell it in a compelling way, people will resonate with that. So for me, as you know, you've seen on my social media, I'm very active on social media. But to take the next
Yes.
step for me was very important, to move from, anyone can be on Facebook, anyone can be on Instagram and shout about the things that they're doing. But a website gives
Mhm,
you that professional credibility as well to say, hey, look, apart from these social media pages, this
mhm,
is my portfolio. This is what I've done. These are the things that I've been involved in.
mhm,
So if you look at that thing that I've done this week, and you compare it to the move from leaving New York and coming to Ghana, it's the same mentality. It's this
mhm.
mentality that as young people we have a right also to take risks. We
Yeah.
calculate the risk, of course. I'm not saying just jump and but we have
Thank
we
you
have
for clarifying.
yeah, yeah. And again, Hadi, as you know, because I followed your career, you take risks. You put yourself out there. You've had people say things about your career and how quickly you've ascended to where you are, and we're all proud of you. But
Mhm,
how do you make sure that you don't let those people prey on your mind so much that you're afraid to take risks, because life is about taking risks, and it's
mhm,
about being intentional about your career and not just going with the wind. Okay. And I feel too
yes.
many young people focus on, oh, let me just meander in the way that I've been told or I've been taught. Yes, for sure, take advice, learn from your elders, but then at times go with your gut. Do what you think is right. And if you've done the work, you've done the research, you've done the ground game and understand how to do things, then you'll be
Mhm.
fine.
I really just couldn't agree more. I think what you've just said now is so profound for me, and I'm sure it will be for a lot of young people. And I think for myself, even doing this show was taking a risk and putting myself out there for somebody that's very private. But then you think, if your career doesn't allow you to be private, you can be private in your personal life. But if your career doesn't allow you to be private, I think you shouldn't, hesitate about really just putting yourself out there. And I think also social media comes into it, and just making the best use of social media.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Mhm. But what I really want us to talk about, Mauda, is youth unemployment. It remains a challenge globally, but we'll focus on Africa. You and I know, Mauda, that this should be on the center of every national development agenda. But do you think African governments are taking it seriously enough? Do you think they're serious about tackling youth unemployment?
So first of all, just to give you a straight answer, yes, but that's general, right?
Right.
Um, Obviously, Africa, as you know, is not a monolith. It's
Yes.
54 countries, et cetera, et
Right.
cetera. That usual thing that researchers will remind you of. But I think it's also important to note that oftentimes, with not just youth unemployment, but many issues facing the African continent, there's a difference between the perception and what's actually going on, right? So for most people, they think governments are filled with people who are unserious. They're just there to fatten their own
Mhm.
pockets, et cetera, et cetera. In my experience, that's not necessarily always the case, right? You have a lot of very good, smart, um, hardworking people working in our governments in African countries. It's just that what we're trying to do, we underestimate the task at hand, I think, is what we're trying to do is a huge job, moving from low income country, status for many of these countries with very
Mhm.
little, economic activity, very little export potential. Some of them don't even have natural resources, and trying to move from that status to and we constantly compare ourselves to countries like the UK and the US that had the
Mhm.
benefit of and particularly pertinent in the moment that we're in now, you
Yes.
know um, hundreds of years of free labor to build their industries and their economies. So we need to understand that and be pragmatic about where we are as
Mhm.
people. But also, yes, we should push our governments to work for us. So that
Mhm.
being, I think a lot of governments on the continent, I'll use Ghana as an example,
Mhm.
are very serious about youth unemployment. And every time they talk about, the economy or things that they need to be working on, youth unemployment is always one of the top priorities. Now, here's the issue, right? I would point to two main issues. I mean, there are many of them. We could go on forever, but I'll point to two just for the benefit of the audience. One is that because of the structure of our economies, right? We have economies that are up to 90% informal, right? So you have a huge number of people who are working in a very precarious setting, you know, in the informal sector. And that's not oftentimes not really counted in the official economic figures. So it distorts things a bit. But not just that, it also creates a situation where it's very difficult for the government to do anything about the informal sector. Because inherently, because it is informal, it is therefore not necessarily in the purview of the government, right? So that's number one.
Yeah.
Number two, so again, structure of the government and things like that. Number two is capacity, right? Many of these governments that we're talking about on the African continent have very well-meaning policies. And someone, you know, I can't remember who was saying this, but someone, you know, was saying while I was at the UN that they're always so impressed with the statements and the policies that African representatives make, you know, the statements that they make and the policies that they come up with when they're speaking at the UN, because it's top notch. It's very good, very well researched stuff. But the problem is capacity to implement, right? Because if you go to any ministry in Gambia or any other African country now, the policies that they have there are very good. You know, on paper, they're outstanding. Now, the issue becomes capacity to implement, you know, because you have a few people at the ministry that are able to drive implementation, and the rest are usually your typical civil servants, right? Now, the way in which you address that, again, is a whole nother discussion. You know, capacity building is a topic on its own. We can have a whole, you know, stories from the continent about that, you know, but,
yes.
but I think the main thing to know with that is, you know, we need to be able to train people better in order to solve our own issues. We need to be able to invest in young people to go away and study and come back with ways of implementing these policies. We need to be able to give, and this is key, we don't do this enough, give people the opportunity to try and fail, right? Because again, technically, you know, like we can try and copy China, or we can try and copy Korea, and people always talk about Gambia, comparing it to Singapore and things like that, right? But it's a different context, Hamga. Maybe Singapore had 20,000 highly trained civil servants that were ready to implement their policies. Maybe Gambia has 200, Hamga. So you can't compare, and when people compare the two countries, I think it's always very unfair because there are a lot of other things that you need to consider: political economy, you know, resources, amount of international help, and things like that. So, and leadership, you know, which is also key. Yes. So when we talk about these things, it's important to remember capacity in all of this, because without capacity, you can't implement.
And I'm just gonna throw some stats at you, Maudo, just because I've had people ask, well, why are you discussing youth unemployment? Why this topic in particular? 60%, to those asking, 60% of unemployed people in Africa are young Africans. When we look closer to home, in West Africa, Senegal, it's 19%. The Gambia, it's something like 12%. And we know that the unofficial figures are far higher than the official figures. And you know, I think, and I'm sure your experience is the same, when you go back home, you see there are so many young people just hanging around in the streets, you know, drinking attire, not really much to do. And I want you to talk to us, Maudo, about how do you think us as young people can help the situation first, and then we can move on to governments.
Okay, so remind me to include the government part in my answer, because sometimes, okay. So
sorry, my questions are so long-winded.
No, they're fantastic questions. So first of all, what can young people do, right? I think from our standpoint, and this is not trying to blame young people for the situation that they're in, because we will talk about the ways in which, you know, the government should be doing more. I think for a lot of young people, as I mentioned earlier, they're very happy meandering through life and just taking what comes to them, right? I'm a firm believer in, anyone that knows me, knows that if I'm sitting and I'm waiting for something to come to me, I get very uncomfortable. I don't really subscribe to, the whole mentality of "Yala bahna dinanyo," what's for you will come, right? I very much believe in saying what's for me will come, but mantamit haramariti ko tuti hamga. Like that's the mentality that
You have
that,
to do
that yes, exactly. And even for, a lot of religious people will tell you, right, that even, God helps you, but you need to help yourself, right? So that mentality, I think we need more of. This yala bahna mentality will not help us, because we, again, we're rowing against the tide. For young people, like you said, 60% of unemployed people are young people. Now, for a lot of those people, they leave university with the promise, well, they go to university with the promise of a job when they come out, right? But they leave university and they don't know where to start, And for me, it's, while you're at university, what did you do to firmly position yourself for a job after university, right? Because university is not just about the studying and the exams and passing and things like that. It's an ecosystem of some of the best minds in your field, an ecosystem of people that could employ you in the future, or people that you could employ to build your business in the future. So build those networks. I always tell people, you should not go to university in the morning, go to your lectures and go home. No, you try as much as possible to be involved in, societies, be involved in networks, be involved in conferences, whatever is being, the student associations. Because at that point, once you get to a point where you know what's going on, you have a good critical mass of people that will let you know if there are any opportunities and things like that, then you're good. I'll give you a personal example. The UN job that I got in the beginning, I was recommended for the job by someone who I went to LSE with. You know, and the only reason she recommended me was because I told her that I was looking for such and such jobs in such and such sectors. Hamga, if you don't tell people what your dreams and aspirations are, they can't help you.
They won't know. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, I'm going to be a bit controversial, I think, but it's important to point out. In Gambia and across the continent, we have a mentality of hiding things, right? We don't talk about what we're doing, what we're working on. We don't like to announce things. We don't like to, and as you can tell, I don't subscribe to that.
Yeah.
But I think,
and all that.
yeah, chat bahut, and to an extent, it's true. But also, if you keep your dreams and aspirations to yourself, no one can help you.
No.
And for me, I'm very open. I talk to people all the time and I tell them, hey, I'm interested in this. Well, I just launched a website. What's more out there than that? Hamga. So I believe in really sharing your dreams and aspirations. And I think young people should do more of that. And put yourself out there. People will resonate with you. They'll give you opportunities if you put yourself out there. If you don't and you stay at home and you're online applying for jobs, someone told me that you're 12 times more likely to get an interview if you're recommended as opposed to when you just apply online, right? And getting an interview, most of the time people don't even respond to job applications because, with Tony Blair Institute put out a job application, a job opportunity the other day. And the HR person was telling me that they got, something crazy like 1,000 applications,
Competition.
Yes, and especially at a time like this when a lot of people are newly unemployed and things like that. You're not going to, the HR person, let's be honest, Hamga, she's not going to look through 1,000 applications. So the truth is she's going to look at the ones that have been recommended first. If those people aren't up to standard or, for whatever reason she doesn't like them, then she'll look at the other people that just applied online. So if you're sitting at home and you're applying online or you're just applying by submitting your documents or whatever, you're at a disadvantage because the people that are out there and meeting people and getting recommendations and things like that and using LinkedIn as their friend and other social media accounts, they're getting ahead because they're constantly meeting the right people and they're constantly putting themselves in a position to be successful, right? So that's what I would say about young people and how they can help themselves. So with the government, right? And I touched on this already, but I'll reiterate and add a bit more.
Mm-hmm.
With the government, the most important thing, I think, is um, having a mentality that we're going to support young people in a sustainable way, right?
Mm-hmm.
So supporting young people in an unsustainable way is like, oh, let's organize a youth conference, and let's have Haddy Ndure, give a keynote speech about the issues facing young people. You know, it's fantastic. I'll tune in and watch,
Mm-hmm.
but has it moved the needle forward? No.
No.
What has actually happened? Nothing. You
Mm-hmm.
know, but so that's why I truly believe in empowering people in a sustainable way. And for me, the most sustainable way to empower young people is through education and employment,
Mm-hmm.
right? So these are the two things that the government needs to focus, any government needs to focus on, right?
Focus
How
on.
do you educate your young people in a way that puts them in the best position to get jobs in the 21st and 22nd century? That's what we need to be
Mm-hmm.
thinking about now. And then
Mm-hmm.
how do you also create employment in the sectors, like I mentioned earlier, that are conducive for young people to be employed, right? So again, that idea of pro-youth sectors. So that's what I would focus on, and the government has a lot of tools they can use. Just quickly, one
Mm-hmm.
thing I think the government or governments don't do enough, right,
Mm-hmm.
is using their fiscal policy in a way
Mm-hmm.
that incentivizes the right investments. So
Mm-hmm.
for many African economies at the moment, what you find is it is much easier for a businessman someone that has money to invest in hotels or real estate or something like that and wait and collect their rent and they're happy and things like that.
Right.
Because it's profitable to do that and it's easier, frankly. You build your house, someone comes and stays there, you collect your money. But what we need to be thinking about is how can we incentivize the people with money in our economies to invest in factories and to
Mm-hmm.
invest in agriculture. So one easy way, well, that's relatively easy, it's not that easy, but of doing that is saying, okay, let's shift our fiscal policy in a way that we reduce taxation for investments in manufacturing and we increase taxation on rent, so property tax, for example, or we create a situation where capital gains tax or things like that are increased, because capital gains tax is notorious for short-termism, right? It creates situations where people invest in short-term things so they can quickly get their money back. But what
Mm-hmm.
we need as African countries or economies is investments in long-term projects, infrastructure, industry, agriculture, and so on and so forth, because that's the way in which we will be able to employ young people and also grow our economies.
Mm-hmm. Now, Maudo, focusing on the Gambia government now, as you know, I spoke to the Ministry of Youth prior to this interview. What you don't know is I also spoke to the former Secretary General of the Gambia, Maudo Jallow, who's a very good friend of mine. So I'm going to read out both of their statements. I'm going to go with the Gambia, the ministry statement first, and then I just want your reaction to it. So in sum, the Ministry of Youth in Gambia said, if you look at the curriculum of the Gambia, you realize that from junior through to secondary and degree level, the type of skills they produce do not match with our job market. So as a result, you realize that a lot of young people are graduating without employment, because in as much as you want to employ someone, you want to see to it that the person is productive. So if your skill is really not quite matching my company's work, it's not going to be in my best interest to employ you. So if we want to address youth unemployment, the education system needs to be looked at. And I think you touched on this a little bit when you said the education system needs to be right, but I just want your reaction to that statement.
I think I completely agree. There's
Mm-hmm.
nothing I would add or subtract from that. I think it hits the nail on the head. When we talk about these things, we need to understand that it's a holistic approach that's going to take us out of the situation that we're in now. It's not one policy. It's not one investment or whatever. It's a holistic approach where we're strategically looking at our economy and saying, how can we change the structure of the economy to benefit young people? because I think the shift that needs to happen is we need to think about things structurally as opposed to just putting out fires as and when they come up. So we have a tendency, I think, to say, oh, there's a situation in Birkama, let's go and solve that. There's a situation in Foni, let's go and solve that. But instead of doing that, what we need to say is, okay, let's sit around the table and talk about and build a policy or strategy that takes all of these things into consideration and brings everyone on board. So Ministry of Youth needs to be constantly, and I know they do this, I'm not saying that they don't, I know they do this already, but Ministry of Youth needs to be in constant conversation with Ministry of Trade and Employment, Industry and Employment, sorry. And then also Ministry of Finance and all these other blocks that will then, come together and make this tower of strategic thinking and policy making and so on and so forth that would benefit young people. I think that's the only way that you tackle this. It's not by having one issue here, one problem there, and solving it as and when it comes up, but having a long-term view and committing to that long-term view across administrations. So whichever government is in power should and this might be a pie in the sky idea, but every government that comes in should be committed to this policy that we come up with, or the strategy, which then gives it continuity, because it's not going to be solved in 5 years. It's not going to be solved in 50. This is a 20, 30-year strategy that we need to implement.
I think you've covered Sabali's response as well, his statement where he also says the education system in the Gambia is outdated, it's not fit for purpose, and that young people should be job creators and not job seekers.
Yeah, I largely agree with that. I think the only part that I would maybe add a caveat to is the point about, young people should be job creators and not job seekers. I think, yes, absolutely. But then one also needs to recognize that in any given economy, even the most entrepreneurial, the most capitalist, the most advanced economies in the world only have about, I might be wrong, but low teens percentage that are entrepreneurs, right? Maybe 12, 13, 14% of the population that are entrepreneurs, and everyone else is employed. So we need to also, as much as we want to push entrepreneurship and the creation of wealth and business and things like that, we also need to recognize that there is going to be a large percentage of the population that need employment. So young people are inherently going to be job seekers as well as job creators. So we need to cater for both, essentially, is what I would add to that. But yes, largely agree.
Okay. Now, Maudo, I mentioned at the start that you are also founder of New Nation Gambia, which is an NGO that you set up to create jobs and opportunities for young people in the Gambia. Tell us about when that journey started for you and what the impact has been so far.
Absolutely, gladly. That I love talking about New Nation. I think so. So we launched in December of 2017. This was towards the end of my master's. I was thinking about, as I said, the plan was always to move back to the African continent, and my plan, is to move back to Gambia in the near or medium term as well. Now, when I was finishing my master's, I was, as always with Gambia in mind, I said to myself, how can I, in my own small way, and remember, this is just after the new Gambia came into, our minds and our lives, and really there was this new hope and anticipation and excitement. And I thought, okay, how can I, in my own small way, contribute to that? So I have always loved this idea of young people advocating for their own, development and advocating for their own policies and things like that, right? Why should a 60, 70, 80-year-old man advocate on behalf of young people? I think young people should be able to do that themselves. And I would like to think that the two of us are great examples of how young people can very, adequately advocate for their own, policies and their own development without needing the help of, others. Now, so the issue became, how do you do that exactly? So I thought, okay, I can't do this alone. So I reached out to a few people at the time, Keba Jame and another friend of mine called Linda Linjai. And we came up with this idea of New Nation. So we wanted it to be an organization that is focused on youth development, but beyond that, also focused on issues that affect young people. So we've had everything from civic education, on our mind. We've run career development sessions where we have young professionals that are working in different fields in the Gambia go to schools like St. Joseph's, St. Augustine, where else? Um, yeah, there are a bunch of them. Latrikunda, speak to young people about their career prospects and just try and inspire them to hope for more. And follow up to that, some of them even picked up mentorship opportunities with some of the people that went to speak to them. So that is something that really gets me excited, because a lot of these young people, when we go there, say to us, we've never had someone come and speak to us about our careers in the way that you have, and it's inspired us to be more and want more. And as we do that, we also inject an element of STEM, so science and technology and engineering and math, because we feel that Gambia specifically doesn't have enough scientists and technology gurus and engineers and mathematicians, and we need more of that, especially in women. So there's also a gender element to what we do as well, where we advocate for young women in these spaces. So a tangible example of that is when we did a science fair that was organized by one of my colleagues in New Nation now, Umi Kuyate, who is currently studying in Edinburgh and doing amazing work in the science field. She organized with MRC this science fair where we got a bunch of young people to go into MRC labs and interact with the technicians, and also just be able to play around with the lab equipment, because for many young people in Gambia, they only study science in terms of theory. There's no practical. Like there's no ability to actually interact with people and learn more about some of the things that they've read about. So that was very exciting. We got these young people and they were so excited afterwards. It was great. And so these are some of the things that we've done. Now, we're restructuring. We have a new executive director that we appointed. Her name is Nganar. Her name is Nganara, and she's working as executive director now. So she's going to oversee what New Nation is doing on the ground. Obviously, I'm still involved. I'm a strategic advisor, to New Nation. But I thought it was very important to build the organization and then give it off. It's not mine to hold on to and say, this is my organization. It was always about empowering young people. And what better way to do that than to say, now that we've set it up, let someone else run it who is on the ground, who is capable and incredibly smart. Yanar is very, very intelligent. And let her run it. As a young Gambian woman, her perspective on things is much better than mine. So I'm very, very proud of that. And we're excited about what the future holds for New Nation.
Thank you. That sounds brilliant. We'll make sure to put links to New Nation Gambia page, as well as obviously your website as well. Now, moving on, Maudo, the past month or so has sparked conversations about just getting ourselves out there and having representation across the board, especially in decision-making roles. Now, as someone who is on the advisory board of the African Youth Leaders Platform, I'm just wondering, when you sit in those big meetings, with other, African leading young change makers like yourself, what are some of the ideas or proposals that you make in relation to moving Africa forward?
So one of the most exciting things we're doing within that advisory board is looking at ways in which young people, so it's two things, right? One is looking at ways in which young people can be more represented in the political space. So actually having young people as ministers, MPs, even running for president or prime minister, depending on what country it is, or running, SOEs, so state-owned enterprises, and so on and so forth, right? So that's one element. Now, the other element, which I'm really excited about, is we're trying to have a youth advisory board for every African president, right?
Mm-hmm.
So making sure that young people are represented at the highest levels of government,
Mm-hmm.
and making sure that there's a regular engagement between actual young people. So not, an older, usually man, saying that he's representing young people, but actual young people speaking articulately and pragmatically about what they're facing and their issues to
Mm-hmm.
the highest levels of government. For
Mm-hmm.
me, that is very powerful, and that's one of the things that we're working on. So that's to give you an idea of some of the things that we discussed. Now, one thing, and I guess is a negative, one thing that I don't particularly like is we tend to focus, as one of my uncles says all the time, on cosmetic changes, right?
Mm-hmm.
So not really focusing on the actual meat of things, but really focusing on small things like, oh, who has which title, who's going where,
Yeah.
who gets what benefits.
Mm-hmm.
That might be great for the people that are in the room. I'm very privileged and honored really to be a part of that.
Mm-hmm.
But while I'm there, I'm representing, hundreds of millions of young people across the continent. And I
Mm-hmm.
need to make sure that I effectively argue their case. So
Mm-hmm.
that means focusing on what we talked about earlier, which is employment,
Yes.
education, and not focusing on, the other, what people call semantics, right? Now, specifically, one of the things that we are really focusing on is employment. So we've had conversations with MasterCard Foundation, who are very much focused on creating millions of jobs in Africa through their foundation's money, and sort of putting that into things like agriculture and agro processing and things like that. In
Mm-hmm.
order and tech, sorry, and in order to create jobs for young people in by 2030.
Mm-hmm.
I think that I can't remember what the actual target is, but I
Mm-hmm.
think it's something like 3 million jobs in Africa by 2030. They want to directly create, right? So we're having conversations with them about that.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of what we've discussed today is actually also exactly what we would discuss in those panels, and it just shows the quality of the conversation that we've had today,
Mm-hmm.
right? So when we go into those rooms, we try and focus on those issues, education, employment, representation of young people, and also an engagement at the highest levels of government with young people. Yeah.
Yes. Now we're gonna move on. We said at the start that we would talk about investing in Africa. We've seen a lot of talk, Maudo, about moving away from foreign aid and being more sustainable. What are your thoughts on this? How can Africa succeed solely without relying on foreign aid and charity? I mean, is it even possible?
Right. In the short term, no.
Mm-hmm.
And if you had asked me this question in January, I would have been a lot more optimistic about the prospects than now. I mean, COVID-19 has been terrible for the whole world, but particularly for Africa. I mean, FDI inflows, foreign direct investment inflows into Africa have really struggled. Most companies, even oil companies, are looking
Mm-hmm.
to save on capital investment and capital spending right now. So it's
Mm-hmm.
it's difficult to actually even pitch the idea of having a company or an organization invest on the continent right now, because
Mm-hmm.
inherently Africa is always seen as risky, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, for many people, they'll say, we don't want to invest in Africa now because this is not the time. We have issues here. So that makes me increasingly pessimistic about the prospects.
Mm-hmm.
However, there is some good news. Just this week it was announced that Mozambique closed a deal for $15 billion, to have their liquefied natural gas project go ahead with Total, right? So that's much needed investment at a time where investment flows have really dried up, right? But we've seen some sectors really struggle. So tourism is struggling and will struggle for a long time. And
Yes.
that's particularly painful for us as Gambians, because we know how much we focus and rely on tourism for employment, and also for forex within the country, and
Yeah.
even revenue, economic activity.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a real issue. You know, some other sectors as well have struggled. Manufacturing has struggled in many countries.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, we could go on and on, but the real outlook at the moment is bleak. You know, many countries are going to be in recession this year. Some countries might be in recession for multiple years in, you know, going forward. And the IMF has even put out projections that it's possible that Africa could wipe out the last 10 years of economic growth
Mm-hmm.
in the next year or a couple of years or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So COVID-19 has been devastating. Don't
Yeah.
get me wrong. It's been
Mm-hmm.
really bad for African economies and African and investment into Africa.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but you know, a big part of my job within the Tony Blair Institute is to look at ways in which we can still bring in investment.
Mm-hmm.
We're encouraged by some of the investments that have happened recently, but
Mm-hmm.
there is still a lot that could be done, but can't be done because of the, you know, and as you know, especially in places like Africa,
Mm-hmm.
investors need to come down and see things for themselves for many reasons, you know, historically.
Mm-hmm.
So this is not the time for investors to come because borders are still closed. And even when they open up, like Senegal is opening their airport on the 15th of July, which is quite
Mm-hmm.
soon.
Mm-hmm.
But there's quarantine protocol and all of these things. So investors really aren't in a situation where they want to take a risk or they want to invest in our economies.
Mm-hmm.
And that's sad, you know,
Yeah.
frankly.
Yes. So you've talked about in like the current situation now, but I want us to talk as well more generally. I know for a fact that kind of potential investors are always concerned about things like corruption and bribery, and they have this perception, which is often a negative one. Partly due to insecurity, instability, especially in terms of governments. And I've been to many meetings and conferences where it's sort of, you know, countries are sort of red flagged and you know, it's, no, this country's having an election. And especially in times of elections, it's like, there's this election coming up. We don't know what the situation is going to be like. And as a result, these countries are red flagged. Do you think that is a fair stereotype? And also in terms of the corruption and bribery?
Absolutely not. I don't think it's fair. There is something to be said, and I'll just, you know, there is something to be said about the fact that there is a lot of decoupling that
Mm-hmm.
needs to happen between business and government in Africa. You
Mm-hmm.
know, the private sector needs to be, you know, independent enough to be able to operate without constantly having interference. And this is across the continent. I'm not speaking about any
Mm-hmm.
government, right? So that's number one. Number two is the other element. So is it fair? No. And I was reading an article just 2 days ago about how, you know, Angola had a civil war many years ago, decades ago at this point, where it was quite bloody, quite difficult actually, economically, but also just in terms of peace and security. Since then, they've struggled to recover in terms of their credit rating. So inherently, Angola's borrowing is at a higher interest rate because of a civil war that happened, you know, well before I was born, right? So to me, it stinks of lazy, you know, risk assessment by
Mm-hmm.
many of the credit rating agencies that we trust around the world, but also a sort of lack of willingness for many of these people that, you know, hold the keys to a lot of these investments to
Yeah.
actually learn more about the continent and know what's actually going on, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that Angola example is a terrible one because they've really struggled to attract investment and even get loans because of that history that they have and also the
Yeah.
perceived issues around the oil that they have and things like that. I'll give you another example.
Mm-hmm.
Nigeria, if anyone that knows, you know, Nigeria, the geography of Nigeria, it's a huge place. You know, on the map it looks quite small, but it's a huge place. Now, there is, you know, don't get me wrong, there is a lot of terrorist activity in the northeast, especially in the north of Nigeria with
Mm-hmm.
Boko Haram, as we all know.
Yeah.
But is it fair, you know, to factor in Boko Haram's activity in the far northeast of the country, far away from many of the economic centers of the country, like Lagos and
Mm-hmm.
Abuja, in the credit risk associated with Nigeria, because you wouldn't have a situation where, because there's instability in Scotland, people are like, oh no, we're not going to invest in London, and yeah, so there's a bit of, seeing countries and the continent as a whole as a monolith, and think that because there's instability in one part of the continent, then the whole continent is risky, right? And it's that thing I'm sure you've had where you talk to your British friends or whatever, and you say, "Oh, I'm from Gambia," and they say, "Oh, that's nice. I know someone from Kenya." What does that have to do with someone from Gambia? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's the issue. Now, another thing that I wanted to point out on that front is we need to also be intentional as Africans in building our image as a continent, right? Because there's enough negativity out there, and I especially people in the diaspora, they're very quick to point out, oh, Africa this, Africa that, there's this problem. I know these problems. I live, in Ghana. I know these problems. I go to Ghana a lot. But can we find positive things to say about our countries and our people, in order, because it's all about image. If you look at, for many people who had never been to, out, as they say, right? It's Mabuge them out is like, don't wear them out, don't wear them out. And then, that's because of the perception that you have from the movies and the things like that. But you can go to certain parts of out and it is terrible.
Yes.
If you ask the migrants that ended up in southern Italy, the conditions that they had to live in, some of it was worse than living, in back home,
Yeah.
So when we talk about our continent and we talk about our countries, let's inject a little bit of pride and a little bit of optimism, because the way we talk about our countries and the way our countries are portrayed in the news, believe it or not, actually has a direct impact on how we're viewed in terms of risk of investment and risk of loans and things like that, which then has a direct impact on our economies, right? So if you think about that as your own personal contribution, or how you're contributing to the mission of developing Africa, it's not that hard. Just speak about your country and your continent in a much more favorable light, and you'll be surprised how much good you're doing. And just lastly on that point, very quickly, Ghana's image right now is through the roof. Everybody wants to come to Ghana. Everybody wants to invest in Ghana. Why? It's not that Ghana has magically become this oasis of peace, tranquility, and economic success in Africa. No, it's on the right trajectory, but they've been very intentional about building that image. And people have been talking very positively about Ghana. They had a Eurobond, recently. It was oversubscribed, I think 4 or 5 times, because people wanted to get a bit of the action. Why? The image.
The image, yeah. So it needs to start with us. We in the international community as well have a responsibility to build that positive image. Maudo, we're going to move on to questions now. I'm conscious of the time. First question from the audience says, we are looking for leaders it says, some young people like me have no idea of the future. They need inspiration. Who are some of the leaders you look up to and why?
I mean, there's so many of them. There's so many. I'm very grateful for having the parents that I have, because they've been, and it sounds like a cliche, but really and truly, my dad worked in the same sector that I'm working in now. I ran away from it for many years. I said I wanted to go into business, but I ended up there, and he's been instrumental in guiding me, and showing me the way. So there's that. And then I also look up to a lot of other people in my sector and people that I went to school with as well. But maybe some people that are famous enough that people would know them. I like Donald Kabaruka a lot. He's the former head of the African Development Bank, and he's a brilliant guy, sharp guy, involved in all kinds of things now. He's someone that I look up to. I look up to, I mean, who doesn't, but Barack Obama is someone that I really look up to and I admire. And one thing that I admire about him is, despite all the things that he went through, the insults, the issues and things like that, he managed to remain calm, collected, and compassionate, And that's one thing I love about him. So these are some of the people I look up to. But generally, I think there's so many role models out there. We just need to look.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Second question says, why is Maudo not working in the Gambia at the moment? He's young, educated, well-traveled, and has a lot to offer to our country. I agree with this, by the way.
I definitely want to. I mean, it's inevitable that I'll end up back in the Gambia. Whether it's soon or a bit later, who knows? But I definitely do want to come back and work in the Gambia. I'll share a quick story with you, if time, just to illustrate. I did apply when I finished my master's. I went to PMO and applied to join the civil service. I applied to GRA. I applied to Central Bank. I applied to, where else did I apply? GCCI, Chamber of Commerce in Gambia. None of them offered me a job.
Okay, they're probably watching this and watching you now and regretting it, I'm sure.
I just want to leave that there. Yeah. I mean, it's, maybe I should. Okay. I applied to GCCI. They offered me an internship, right? A month later, the UN offered me a full-time job. Again, I'll just leave.
Yeah, all right. Third question says, why is it the people who need the jobs the most are not getting the opportunities? Are the jobs based on who you know and what connections you have?
This particular point breaks my heart every time, because it's true. There are a lot of very capable young people, especially in Africa, that don't get opportunities, both in the business world and also in terms of employment. Now, one thing that I will say is there is always an element of who you know, whether it's in Gambia. I've been privileged enough to live in a few places in my life, and I've seen how, how do you know this? In the UK is the same thing. In America, it's the same thing. This idea that these other countries think we work perfectly and people get employed based on merit, it's maybe a bit better, but it's definitely not, So one thing I will say is, instead of looking at it in terms of, oh, it's about who you know, so I'm not going to get this job, try and know some people, And this is me talking from the standpoint of, maybe instead of looking at it as a problem, use that problem as an opportunity. So if you know that it's about who you know, try and know some people, network, put yourself out there, start a LinkedIn page, start a Twitter page, whatever it is, and put yourself out there. Let people know what you're working on. Let people know who you are, your CV. I have someone I know a friend who started a Twitter page, tweeted a few things so people would follow him, and then posted his CV. Things like that. You need to draw attention to yourself in order to get opportunities, because if people don't know you, they can't give you opportunities, and that's what I'll say.
And we're going to end with my personal question to you, which is there any plans to go into politics? You obviously work quite closely to governments.
No, I don't think so.
No, not at all, or no, not right now?
I don't think so. My mom heard someone say that I should go into politics, and she said over her dead body. So I love my mom very much. So no.
Thank you so much, Maudo. I cannot wait for our sit-down interview. But for now, thank you very much for lending your voice and sharing your story and your very valuable insights with all of us. And if anybody wants to know and learn more about you and the work that you do, they can go to
MaudoJallow.com is my name. So just go to MaudoJallow.com. But also on all social media accounts, it's literally at Maudo Jallow, whether it's on Twitter, Instagram, and on Facebook as well. You can just put in Maudo Jallow and I should come up. Haddy, this is really, honestly, I'm not just saying this because I'm on your show, but it's been really enjoyable. I didn't even realize it's been an hour.
I hadn't either.
I really enjoyed the conversation, and I'm so happy for the opportunity.
Thank you. And to everybody watching as well, thank you very much. Have a lovely weekend, and I'll see you next Saturday.
Bye, guys. Thank you.
Okay, if you wait.
Hi everyone, my name is Haddy and I'm a journalist and communications specialist. I believe that as Africans, we should be in charge of every narrative coming out of Africa.
I'll end it.
We have a lot of positive stories to tell and share with the world, and I'm determined